Hello, this is Professor Herskowitz again, and now we're going to talk about the property system, Chapter 7 from the text. What we want to look at property, and this isn't real estate, this is property. So we want to talk about how property is an exclusive legal fence around rights that individuals have. It's a key part of the economic model, the economic system that drives the United States. We also want to talk about how property is legally acquired and transferred, and that's both real property and personal property. We'll be talking about how to categorize different types of ownership interests. You can own property by yourself, with other people, in a corporation. We'll be talking about that. Very important concept. And finally, to organize and apply the rules of security interests. How do you know that you own the property, and how do you keep other people from making claims on that property that you've purchased? Okay, property. What is property? It's a legal right to exclude others from resources that were originally possessed or acquired without force, theft, or fraud. And when we say resources, we mean physical resources as well as intellectual resources. Property can be absolute, but it's not infinite. You can have the total rights for it, but it does not go on necessarily forever. People die, property is transferred. Boundaries can be ambiguous. This is both on the physical side as well as when we talk about contracts or other intangible assets. And it is the basic foundation of the free market. There is a book called The Mystery of Capital that the text makes a reference to. I make a lot of use of that text in the International Economic Development course. It's a fascinating book, and it goes into great detail as to how a free market system is the basis for the economic system that we work under. Okay. Property is central to society's achievement of prosperity. That's what we're talking about with the Mystery of Capital by Hernando de Soto. It promotes incentives, it makes resources easily divisible, and establishes conditions for capital formation. It allows, the legal system allows property to be transferred. There's two different types of property we're talking about: real property, that's real estate, that's land and interests in land, and personal property, that's all movable resources, and intangible property such as trademarks, contracts, patents, and things like that. Let's talk about primarily the physical aspects of property in the world. You have surface rights. If you buy your house, you get the house, you get anything on the surface. It's two-dimensional, easy to identify. It includes riparian rights for all the water that crosses the land. Obviously, that has certain restrictions on it because those waters come from land above you and go to land below you, so that the riparian rights are not exclusive. But land ownerships consist of more than the surface. You can have the air rights above the air. Now, it doesn't go infinitely high, but when you're talking about places like New York or San Francisco, other congested areas, those air rights have a lot of value because somebody can actually build over your house, and as they've done by Times Square in New York City. There's also subsurface rights. The landowners own the rocks, soil, minerals, everything beneath their beneath the property, and that is, just let me get back over here. It can be sold separately, so you can own the property and you can sell the oil and gas rights below it. Trespass is the unlawful entry of one person to another's property. It's a violation of the legal fence. Look at the Coastal Oil and Gas Corp case that's listed in the text. And the issue there was whether slant drilling was allowed when it was actually taking oil from underneath someone else's property. So the subsurface rights, mineral rights, gas and oil, rule of capture. If you own the property, as it is over here, you can drill straight down to a pocket of oil. That's fine. If you are owning the property next to it and you slant drill and you go over that property line, even if it's 300 feet below the surface, that's a trespass. You can't do that. However, you can slant drill and capture the oil that is coming into your property. So look at that case and you can see a little bit about how trespass works. Different types of ownership that we want to look at. Fee simple. This represents the maximum estate, the maximum rights that a person owns under the law. And you have a fee simple estate. It's that bundle of rights and powers of land ownership. In my real estate class, I used to bring a bunch of pencils wrapped around with some rubber bands, and I take one off and say, this is the right to lease it. This is the right to be able to take the trees off. This is the right to be able to use the water. This is the right to be able to dig the oil. And all these different rights is this bundle of rights that you have when you own a piece of property. The fee simple absolute says there's no limitations or conditions attached. You own that property. Fee simple defeasible. It has a condition attached to it for its conveyance. These are different types of conditions that the seller may have put on it. It would be, for example, if you sold alcohol on it, that might then revert back to the owner. It's defeasible. There's some condition subsequent to you owning it that would allow that property to go back to the previous owner. An example would be so long as the land is used for agricultural purposes. If you start to build a shopping center on it, well, the previous owner would say that they have the right to take that land back. You don't see that too often. Most of the land deals that we have generally you see is buying and selling houses, some investments, things like that. But the defeasible cannot be an illegal condition. For example, there used to be that property could not be sold to blacks. That is, the Supreme Court has found that that is unconstitutional, and so all of those conditions were stricken. So you cannot put a race limitation onto property. Another type of ownership is a life estate. It grants an ownership in land for the lifetime of the specific person. Land reverts to the original grantor upon death of that person. I know a real estate developer in California that was trying to aggregate pieces of property to do a shopping center, and it was a large ranch there, and he bought all the land, but they took a small parcel where the house was, and they gave the seller a life estate. So as long as that person was alive, and I think he said, or his wife, then they could stay in that house. But once that person died, then the land would revert back to the shopping center builder. So the shopping center builder, as part of the deal, he bought all of the land and then granted back to the seller a life estate. Leasehold estates, fancy word for a lease, property rights granted by tenants, to tenants by a landlord. This is the right to use the land and to have exclusive use of the land for a period of time. This can also be qualified. It can be limited to what parts are being possessed, what you can do on it, things like that. But a regular house lease says that you have the exclusive right to live in that house, use the house, treat it as your own for a certain period of time. Leasehold interests may be transferred just as fee simple interests can be transferred. So if you have a lease, it has value, you can turn around and sell that lease to somebody else. They then assume the lease and they start making the payments to the owner and then they have the right to use it under the same conditions as the lease. You cannot transfer a greater interest than you actually own. Okay, co-ownership. There's situations, we were talking about ownership by an individual, but there are situations where people can own property together. Tenants in common, joint tenancy, community property, trust. There's multi-unit ownerships, condos, cooperatives, time-sharing. Business ownership, real property can be owned by any business entity, corporations, general limited partnerships, LLCs. So one of the most important types of co-ownership is concurrent ownership, where more than one person can own the same property. The ownership is undivided and applies to personal and real property. You can have co-ownership of a car. You can have co-ownership of a house. You're going to need to know the difference between tenancy in common and joint tenants. Tenancy in common is where the tenants own different shares of the resource. One tenant can own 1/4, one 3/4. They can own 50-50. The key thing is, upon the death of one of those parties, the interest that they have in that property reverts to their estate. Whereas in a joint tenancy, the tenants have equal ownership shares, but they have the right of survivorship, so that if one party dies, the other party then owns the entire property. Why would somebody do that? Well, it avoids probate of a home. So if you're married, you have a husband or a wife, you want them to be able to take all that property, then you would take a ownership as joint tenants and with the right of survivorship, so that if one dies, it doesn't go through probate, there's no taxes, it automatically means that the surviving party owns 100% of that property. Thus, if you and your college roommate decide to buy a house together, are you going to buy that as tenants in common or as joint tenancy? Think about it and be ready to answer that, maybe on a quiz or something. Okay, another form of co-ownership is time-sharing properties. This is a physical premises that different people have the right to live in it, to use it for a period of time. You find this most frequently in resorts. Easements is a right to use the land. We're going to be talking about that in much greater detail in a few minutes. Okay, that's all for this segment, and I will finish